The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost by John Bellairs, Chapter 10. It was a long time before either Fergie or the Professor moved. Finally, Fergie dragged himself to his feet. His legs felt wobbly, but his head was clear. The Professor was struggling to stand up. Fergie heard him snort and swear under his breath. That was a good sign. If he was in a lousy temper, that meant he was okay. "By the old Harry!" the Professor growled. "Something came past us like an express train, but what on earth was it, and where are our flashlights?" Fergie knelt down and groped on the hard, flinty steps. Finally, his hand closed around the old seal beam searchlight. He fumbled for the switch, and after jerking it back and forth several times, he got the light to come on, but it was a pale yellowish glow, not the usual dazzling white ray. "Hey, what's wrong?" muttered Fergie. "It's not working the way it's supposed to." "This is an evil place, that's what's wrong," snapped the Professor. "I think that the sooner we clear out, the better. So you can help me locate my flashlight in the tool bag. We'll be on our way." "So if you can help me locate my flashlight and the tool bag, we'll be on our way." A few steps farther down, they found the tool bag lying on its side. Near it was the Professor's flashlight. After banging it a bit, he got it to come on, but it cast only a weak beam. Up the winding steps, the two of them slogged, and after a few more turns, they finally made it to the top. The vault, with its square tomb slabs, was not a terribly cheery place, but Fergie and the Professor were glad to see it, and they were delighted when quite suddenly their lights began to burn more brightly again. What do we do now?" Fergie gasped as he stumbled into the long, cool tunnel. The Professor set down his tool bag and mopped his forehead with his sleeve. "I wish I knew," he said wearily. "Ensign French's tomb was supposed to be down in that evil hole, but it is clear now that the sign was set up to deceive us. It's a blasted lie!" The Professor began to grow tense and angry, but he forced himself to calm down. There was still a chance that Ensign French's tomb might be here somewhere, and if it was, they had to find it. Fergie and the Professor plodded down the length of the tunnel, flashing the beams of their lights over the ghostly white marble tomb slats. At the far end, they stopped before a slab that stood 2 feet above the level of the floor. It read, "Ensign Ulysses Theodore French, 1873 to 1909. Ensign French is the boss." "Crowbar, please," the Professor grimly as he held out his hand. Fergie dug his hand into the satchel and came up with the small crowbar. With a muttered curse, the Professor snatched it from him and began prying at one side of the slab. Almost immediately it began to move. The Professor slid the bar up and pried a little more, and the slab fell forward out of its niche. Springing nimbly backward, the Professor let the slab crash on the tunnel floor. He raised his flashlight and looked. There was nothing behind the slab but gray granite blocks, firmly mortared together. The tomb slab, had been a fake. "Well, that's about it, isn't it?" said the Professor bitterly, as he turned and started walking back toward the entrance to the vault. "There's nothing to do but go back to the wretched hotel and while away the rest of the evening. Tomorrow, I suppose I'll have to call up Johnny's grandparents and see how he is." The Professor's voice was beginning to crack, and he seemed to be on the verge of crying. Fergie glanced at him sympathetically. He liked to pretend that he was tough, but he felt awful right now. "It's okay, Professor," he said in a choked-up voice. I mean, we tried, didn't we?" "It's not okay," muttered the Professor through his teeth. "And if you don't mind, I don't want to talk right now. Let's just clear out." They went up the steps and down the length of the dark, echoing church. When they opened the side door and stepped out, they saw that the fog had all blown away and the stars were out. The cold air felt good after the clammy closeness of the church's crypt, but fresh air couldn't revive the spirits of Fergie and the Professor. They felt miserable and defeated. They got into the car and drove off, and neither one of them said a word until they pulled into a parking place in the Van Twiller town square. Gloom hung over them like a mantle of fog. Back up in their hotel room, Fergie and the Professor did what they could to cheer themselves up. They felt very dirty and decided to bathe. Since they couldn't agree who'd go first, they flipped a coin and the Professor won. While the old man scrubbed and sang bits of Latin hymns, Fergie stripped off his clothes and put on his bathrobe. He went to the tool bag, unzipped the top, and took out the book on heraldry that he had removed from Zebulon Windrow's library. Sitting down on the bed, he turned on the lamp and began to leaf through the pages. The book turned out to be fairly interesting. Fergie was nuts about history, and he had always been fascinated by the strange designs that medieval knights wore on their shields, The book had pages of full-color illustrations showing many different designs and naming each one. Some of the names were pretty silly. There was Checky and Gyrony, Palliwavy, and Barry Dancity. Fergie couldn't help laughing at these names, and he began to wonder if there were designs called Jumpy Bumpy or Dipsy Doodly. Finally, the bathroom door opened and the professor came out. He was amused to see that Fergie was reading the heraldry book, and he sat down on the bed for a second to peer over his friend's shoulder. In one corner of a page, the professor noticed a shield that was quite famous. It showed 3 silver lilies on a dark blue field. This was the shield the kings of France had used at one time, but there was an older shield that French kings had carried into battle way back in the Middle Ages. What was it called? The professor tried to remember, but the name wouldn't come, and just as he was about to open his mouth to ask Fergie if he knew, Fergie slammed the book shut and made a beeline for the bathroom. When Fergie lowered himself into the tub, the hot water felt wonderful. He soaped himself and hummed and closed his eyes and tried to imagine that everything was all right. But then he thought of Johnny, and gloom descended on him again. Their great mission had failed, and now Johnny was probably going to die. Fergie felt absolutely helpless. What could he do? What could anyone do? He thought about the dead dog and the nightmarish salt caves and the fake tomb of Ensign French. There was something evil out at the Windrow estate, something that seemed to be lurking in the shadows and laughing at them. Was there a ghost? He didn't know, but he did know that every clue they had followed had led them to a dead